Morning light gathers differently over small towns. In Nain, the road runs like a ribbon toward a gate cut into the hillside, and the town breathes in a rhythm older than news. People know each other's steps. They know who laughs loud, who trades fairly, who keeps water cool. Into that familiarity came a day that would cut the town's story in two and send a rumour of mercy racing past fields and hills. Jesus arrived with disciples and a crowd, a moving classroom, still humming with the last lesson. He had healed at a distance, spoken with an authority that felt like clean wind, and people followed because hope loves to walk in company. As they approached the gate, another procession approached from the inside. Funerals have a sound, not the brass of ceremony, but the ache of neighbours, the steady cadence of feet, the low cry of a mother whose world has folded. He was her only son. She was a widow. Two sentences that carry an economy, a future, a lineage, and a fragile shelter. In that culture, sons were more than affection. They were provision and name. A widow with no son stood on the edge of survival. The townspeople knew this math in their bones. They gathered not only to mourn a boy, but to mourn the dangers that would reach for his mother after the burial. They met at the gate, the crowd of life and the procession of loss. The timing was not staged, it was Providence wearing the look of coincidence. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion. The verb is strong. It speaks of a movement in the depths, a gut-level stirring that does not wait for a speech. "Do not weep," he said. It was not a platitude thrown at a wound, it was a preface to reconstruction. He came up and touched the bier. The bearers halted, not because they understood, but because authority can interrupt rituals without insulting them. "Young man, I say to you, arise." The sentence entered a silence that had never lost a contest. Death had always won this street. The boy sat up and began to speak. Words returned, the currency of the living. Jesus gave him to his mother. That last phrase is the tenderness of the scene. Power does not keep trophies. It restores people to the arms that need them. Fear and praise filled the road. A great prophet has arisen among us. God has visited his people. The town's theology tried to catch up to what their eyes had seen. News travelled far and fast because people always pass on the moments that rewrite what they thought was possible. This is the skeleton of Nain's story. To feel its life, we should slow down and attend to the angles. The collision of processions, the compassion that crosses thresholds, the authority that speaks to what cannot hear and makes it hear, the social recalculation that happens when a vulnerable person is not abandoned to statistics. First, the geography of the gate matters. Gates are places of decisions, commerce, courts, greetings, goodbyes. A funeral passing out and a teacher walking in meet where communities decide who they will be. Some stories happen on stages. This one happens at a door where life exits and enters, and Jesus chooses the door as his pulpit. Second, the language of compassion is not a mood. It is movement. He saw, he felt, he approached, he touched, he spoke, he restored. The verbs pile up into a pattern. Compassion without approach is sympathy. Compassion without touch is theory. Compassion without speech leaves people to narrate their own despair. Jesus refuses partial solutions. He stitches sight to action and action to restoration. Third, the touch. In that world, contact with death brought impurity under the law's ceremonial logic. But here, the direction of influence reverses. Purity moves outward. Life moves toward death and does not become less. Jesus does not avoid contamination. He abolishes it by carrying a holiness that is not fragile. Fourth, the word, arise. He does not chant, bargain, or borrow. He speaks as the author speaks, to a character everyone else assumed had left the page. This matters because it tells us what kind of authority we meet in him. Not the power of a healer with a technique, but the power of the one whose voice called the world into being and now calls a boy back into his mother's arms. Fifth, the poverty that was about to become policy. Without her son, the widow's life would bend under weight she could not carry. Alms gleaning, extended kin, these were thin threads. A miracle here is not only a private gift, it is public justice. God's kingdom cancels a future of scarcity with a sentence of life. The town's budget changes because one voice re-entered one house. Sixth, the collision of processions is a picture of discipleship. We walk with Jesus toward the world and meet sorrow walking toward the grave. Discipleship is not an inward club of ideas. It is a movement willing to be interrupted at gates. If you want to know where the next lesson will be, find the intersection of your schedule and someone else's pain. That crossing is where he tends to teach. Let's linger in the quiet. After the boy speaks, what did he say? The text does not tell us. Perhaps he called his mother by her name. Perhaps he took a breath and cried the first sentence that proves you are alive. I am here. Jesus gave him back. That handoff is the point where theology becomes breakfast, a family that does not dissolve, work that can continue, neighbours who sleep easier because grief did not finish its work. Seventh, the fear that follows miracles is not distrust of goodness. It is awe faced with a reordered map. When the familiar laws wobble, humans tremble. Awe is a good teacher if it leads to worship and not to superstition. They said, God has visited his people. They were right. Visit does not mean brief. It means presence with purpose. Eighth, note the difference between delay and denial. Jesus says, do not weep, and then immediately moves. Elsewhere, he delays and still loves. Timing is not arithmetic. In Nain, compassion arrives on time. In other towns, it arrives after long watches, and yet the heart behind it is the same, a refusal to let death be the final editor of stories. Ninth, the mother's future has dignity again. Sorrow is not erased, it is reshelved beneath joy and gratitude. We do not learn her name, but we learn her importance. God's economy measures value in different units than ours. A nameless widow on a forgotten street becomes the center of a revelation that will travel farther than her town ever dreamed. 10th, there is a prophetic echo in the scene. Elijah once gave a son back to a widow. The crowd's cry about a great prophet remembers that. Yet Jesus does not pray for power to arrive. He commands with the power that already belongs to him. The echo honors history. The difference announces divinity. Carry this into our own streets. We pass gates too, hospital doors, courthouse steps, school entrances, factory turnstiles. Two processions still meet there, people escorting loss and people following hope. The question is whether the people following hope will stop, feel, and act with language and touch that changes futures. Maybe your town's widow is a single parent juggling two jobs. Maybe the only son is a teenager swallowed by numbness. Maybe the beer is the clinical word on a printed sheet. The principle is not to imitate the miracle as performance. The principle is to imitate the compassion as practice and the faith as posture. We cannot command death, but we can resist its rehearsals, cynicism, abandonment, the casual cruelty of looking away. At this midpoint, allow a brief pause. If this episode serves you or someone you love, please like, comment, share, and subscribe so others can find this story's hope and carry it to their own gates. Back to the road outside Nain. The bearers adjust their grip and then release what they were trained to carry all the way to the hillside. Neighbours put away the spices they had prepared. A mother learns again how to hold a loving weight. The crowd learns how to shift from mourning to feasting without guilt, because sometimes the holiest thing you can do after tears is bake bread. The news travels, first to the next village where a cousin hears and shakes his head, then to the markets where traders repeat it the way they repeat prices, then to the courtyards where children whisper the last sentence before sleep. A town that expected to practice one kind of memory has been given another. See also what Jesus does not do. He does not build a shrine at the gate. He does not linger for applause. He gives and moves on, leaving behind not a monument but a mother and son household intact. His miracles are never about brand. They are about restoring the world in small, specific rooms. Let us ask what the disciples learned. They will later face their own gates, prisons, councils, cities suspicious of strangers. They must remember that authority can stop a procession and start a different one. They must remember that compassion is not a comment but a path. They must remember that giving someone back to their people is as holy as preaching a sermon. Theologically, Nain tells us something about the kingdom's direction. It does not only forgive guilt, it rolls back consequences where and when it will. It does not only promise later, it intrudes now. Later remains, it anchors hope, but now gets a taste that makes endurance meaningful and mission urgent. Jesus does not run from the smell of mourning. He walks into it and rewrites it mid-sentence. Practically, what does it look like to live this story today? First, pay attention to gates. Notice thresholds where loss passes by. Show up there. Hospitals at shift change, court days when sentencing empties faces, school exits where a counsellor watches a student walk away too fast. Second, cultivate compassion that moves. Ask the Holy Spirit to convert sentiment into skill, the right word, the gentle touch, the